people buy their way out of the problem.
And it's gone on forever. This has also been my own dilemma with doing any type of cap and trade system, because really you create a commodity system out of something where people don't have to be responsible for anything. And now, even though you and I may not be on the same page with regard to the role of carbon in the world, there are so many things I am on the same page with you about in your body of work and in your calling, because this is a spiritual commitment. To me, stewardship is spiritual, and you can't disconnect and bifurcate our activities, since all of our activities are impacting everything. But for example, in the United States, NOAA is part of allowing the U.S. Navy plans to decimate 11.7 million marine mammals over the next 5 years. And I'm not a political person, but Obama approved and has the head of Monsanto as his head of agriculture. Yeah. In my view, Polly, people fall in love with and get mesmerized by official leaders. And when you become mesmerized by official leaders, whatever their name, whoever they are, wherever they are, and you don't look into the detail of all of these legal instruments, it's hard to know what's really going on. So I never get mesmerized by any leader's speech. I always look at where are they dwelling? What are they signing? To me, this is not a political issue, but it ends up looking like there is a geopolitical call to do something different. It's not enough that they get fined, because they just pay it off and proceed. But I find several things, and as a lawyer, I know I can say this to you, okay? I find several things problematic with what's happened here in the United States. And to me, this is a microcosm. It's just an example of what goes on in many parts of the world. When I looked into what happened here with the Gulf Coast, I did not want to be part of doing any type of media or journalism to just make BP wrong. I didn't want to have that kind of conversation. What I wanted to have a conversation is who's involved? When did they know? Who are the subcontractors? And when you go into it, all these other subcontractors, like Halliburton, Transocean, and others, all have a role in how this came to be. And nobody's accountable. Nobody. Talk about it.
Well, this is absolutely it. It's the failure to actually accept responsibility. And our laws have facilitated that. One of the things I'm addressing in Eradicating Ecocide, my book, is really exposing the laws that have created this situation. And I trace the origins of corporate supremacy to one judicial comment which granted the fictional person, the corporation is a fictional person in legal terms, the same rights as humans. But the biggest problem with that is that, of course, a piece of paper, a charter or an articles of association can never be put in prison. And so when you grant rights to the corporation, you cannot impose responsibilities. So all you can do is fine them. And my belief is that we have to expose the origins of this corporate supremacy and really break it and stop this happening so that the individuals themselves start taking responsibility. Now, there is a way that we can do this. And in fact, it's something that was put in place as an international criminal principle back in 1948 at the Nuremberg war trials.
Talk about it.
That principle is called superior responsibility. And what that means is, and it was determined then, that you could not hide behind either saying that, well, it's the order of others, but more importantly, the more superior you were in an organization, in an army, in a corporation, in a business as well, because certain heads of business were taken to court as well as heads of various generals. And by imputing the principle of superior responsibility, what was determined was that crimes are committed by humans. Therefore, it is humans who must take responsibility. You can't hide behind the entity of an organization. You can't hide behind some form of immunity. And you can't hide behind saying, oh, well, it's only BP over there. It's actually about all those who are in a position of superior responsibility taking on board, on their shoulders, their duties and their obligations. And once you do that, then you'll have corporations being far more careful about what they decide to do or not to do. Think about it. If you were head of a corporation and you're sitting there with your board of directors and you're saying, okay, let's go in and, we'll use the example of drilling. Let's do that. Unfortunately, it's now a crime of ecocide if anything goes wrong. Goodness, that means I could go to prison. Maybe we should investigate clean energy solutions instead. You can see how very quickly people would start to take responsibility for their superior responsibilities the higher they are up in an organization.
Many of the drillers, Polly, knew several weeks before that it was going to blow because they were working with faulty equipment, but they couldn't say anything. I think there's another part of this, which is that people need to be willing to be fired, to leave their jobs, to have faith, to know that other opportunities will open if they don't participate in activities like this. They knew what they were doing.
Well, in fact, this is another aspect that I cover in the book about protecting the eco-whistleblowers. Because, of course, at the moment, we have very little protection for those who do blow the whistle on these things. And recently in the Philippines, certain laws have been brought in to do just that. Really radical laws that allow you, the whistleblower, to go to court and seek an emergency environmental protection order and not have to pay your court costs until the conclusion of the case. And if the case is in your favor, that emergency environmental protection order is put in place, then you won't have to pay your costs. The other side will. Now, that's fantastic. That's very important that that's being done. And there are other rules of procedure that are being put in place as well there to protect against what are called in America, it's known as SLAPs, strategic litigation, that's used against activists or people who stand up to take a stance against what they perceive to be wrong and damaging the environment. And in the Philippines, they've provided protection for people who are prepared to stand up and do that, or are being threatened by big corporations with extensively costly litigation to shut them up. That's effectively being outlawed now, which is just marvelous. We need that right across the world.
I did an interview with this couple in New Mexico who has been in the natural paint business, and they described to me the inner workings of the paint industry. And it's very interesting because if one perceives oneself to be green and a planetary advocate and an environmental advocate, all of that, what they shared with me was so interesting that even though you can slap a green packaging on paint, they talked about regulations in the paint industry. They talked about how the paint industry got away with not really being able to have natural paint so that there's no solvents. Oh, yeah. It was so fascinating. They separated the wheat from the chaff. What happens is that the big companies are trying to get in, quote, and ride on the green movement, and they have laws or regulations that allow them to get in under the radar, and they're absolutely not green. They're absolutely not good for people, but they're in.
Well, this is about what I call, and I address this in the book, compromise laws that are put in place that really don't actually address at source the damaging or destructive practices. In particular, reference to paint. Unless you can actually eat your paint, then obviously you're going to have chemicals on your hands that really aren't going to do you or your immediate environment any good at all. I would recommend linseed paint, for instance, which is very popular in Scandinavian countries, that you can actually eat and you'll be fine. And that's a rule of thumb for me. It's the same with chemicals that are inside, women's products. I won't put anything on my skin that has on the back of the bottle something I actually don't understand. Why would I want to put some chemicals on my body when my body will inevitably soak up at least 60% of that? And that includes what I breathe in as well. So trying to control my own environment is hugely important, but it does mean being informed at the end of the day. And that means then that the onus is on the consumer to get themselves up to speed rather than the other way around.
Right.
And that means that, in fact, who